In the past year, Anne and Greg have gotten better at expressing their needs and asking for what they want. One of the payoffs for Greg is that he spends less time trying to guess what Anne wants. "I used to always be trying to anticipate her needs," says Greg. "I would do all these things that I hoped would make her happy, but she rarely noticed, and I would be exhausted from trying to figure her out. Now I can relax, knowing that if she wants something, she will ask for it. I like it much better this way. I take care of my own needs. She takes care of hers. We both will go out of our way to meet each other's needs, but we don't do so much mind reading." One need that Anne has made abundantly clear to Greg is her need for security and affirmation. "I need and want massive doses of reassurance," Anne says. To help meet this need, she informed Greg one day that whenever she was being overly emotional, whether angry or withdrawn or tearful, what she really wanted was to hear how much he loved her. She wrote down on a card the exact words that she wanted him to say. She handed him the card and said, "Here are your lines." The card read, "I love you. You're the person I want to be with. I want to live with you for the rest of my life." Greg, the man who had once proclaimed that he was not able to console anyone, has been able to deliver his lines with utter sincerity. Anne and Greg have also learned a new way to fight. Essentially, they do a modified version of the full container, called the container transaction exercise. "We fight in a very healthy manner," says Anne. "We get the anger out, but we don't get into the old garbage. We're real honest and direct." Anne gave me an example. "I looked at Greg's hand the other day and I noticed that he wasn't wearing his wedding ring. I felt hurt and betrayed. But instead of stewing about it, I spoke up immediately. I said, 'I'm really hurt that you're not wearing your ring. A ring is a visible sign to other people that we're married, and it's really important to me. I'm really upset. I don't know what it means that you're not wearing it. I don't like it, and I want you to wear it.' Instead of getting defensive or abusive, Greg listened to me and said, 'It makes sense that you feel that way. I understand that you're angry.' Later, he explained to me why he wasn't wearing it. It had to do with the fact that I had reverted to using my maiden name, and he was hurt about that. In his mind, not wearing the ring was kind of tit for tat. We didn't resolve the problem immediately because the issues were complex. But the important thing is that we both got our feelings out. We listened to each other. We diffused all the bad energy. And we're not angry anymore. Before, we would have gotten obsessed about it and gone on and on. Through these efforts, Anne and Greg have been able to meet enough of their needs to attain a new level of acceptance. I am secure enough in our relationship that I can now accept the fact that Greg is basically a self-contained person, says Anne. It no longer threatens me. I can wait for him to reveal his feelings. I don't have to press him. When he's upset, my instinct is to make him tell me right now what is bothering him. I just want to get it over with. But that always puts me in the facilitator role. The other thing I found is that if I wait before I make demands, he usually resolves things himself in his own way. And even when he doesn't, I can live with things the way they are. I've learned that I don't have to fix everything. Anne and Greg are the first to admit that working to achieve a conscious marriage is not easy. In fact, Anne wants to go on record as saying, "Working things out with Greg is the hardest thing I've ever done." Greg voices a similar opinion. Marriage is like growing flowers, he says. You always have to work on it. If you don't, the weeds start to grow and choke out the flowers. He makes another comparison. When you garden, it's important to have good tools. You can carry water by hand and dig in the dirt with your hands. But it's much easier to use a hose and a shovel. That's how I feel about living with Annie. We have the right tools and skills to make the kind of marriage we want. The reason Ann and Greg are willing to put so much effort into their relationship is that they reap daily rewards. Greg thinks that one of the most obvious changes has been in their emotional states. Early on in our relationship, says Greg, we were both volatile people. Only I kept a lid on my feelings, and Ann was too free with hers. Now she's become less crazy, and I'm more emotional. Not that we're trying to become what the other person was. We've just reached a balance. We tend to oscillate around a mean. Sometimes she's more emotional than I am. Sometimes I'm more emotional than she is. But it's like we've established middle ground, which is very reassuring. Greg finds that what he's learning in his marriage has helped him become a more effective manager. I've gotten quite adept at spotting hidden agendas, he says. I know that the issue that people are talking about is not always the real issue. I look for the underlying problems. He is also better at putting himself in others' shoes. I say to myself, if I were that person, what would I be wanting or needing at this moment? Being able to empathize with Ann has given me that skill. My marriage has also made me a better communicator and able to withstand more pressure. If someone at work has a problem or becomes angry, I'm able to keep from getting defensive. I'm able to get things done. Ann finds that her relationship with Greg has made her a more spiritual being. The strongest force in the universe is what I would call Christ in us, or the Holy Spirit, says Ann. And to me, that's the same thing as the drive to completion. In my mind, our purpose on earth is to be the best that we can be in terms of loving and living and being kind to other people and developing our talents and our skills. I think the best way I can do this is to have full access to who I am. And that means being honest about who I am, the negative part of me as well as the positive. Being free to be complete. That has happened in this relationship. It's a great paradox, because before I thought I was feeling self-confident, but in reality, it was grandiosity. Now I just feel good about myself, all of me. I like being who I am. I can be alone and be happy. I'm more comfortable in my own skin than I have ever been. I'm walking around better on a moment-to-moment basis. My anxiety level is so low. That's a real difference. I feel truly happy and secure for the first time in my life. I asked Ann if she had any advice for people who would be reading this book and perhaps confronting some of these ideas for the first time. My advice would be to focus on yourself, she said. And when I say that, I mean you should realize that what you are doing for your partner is what you're doing for yourself. It's about your own personal growth. I finally learned that when I was stretching to meet one of Greg's needs, I was reclaiming a part of myself. So anytime your partner asks you to do something, say to yourself, does this make sense? Does it behoove me as an individual to do this? And if it makes good sense, and if it behooves you to do it, then do it, regardless of how you feel about it. Because in meeting the needs of your partner, you will be recapturing a part of yourself. Kenneth and Grace. Kenneth and Grace met in the 1940s when they were both in college. Kenneth was a pre-med student and Grace was studying art history. They became friends when they happened to sit next to each other on the bus going home for spring vacation. Kenneth has a clue to what attracted him to Grace. A woman in the seat in front of us had a screaming baby and was having a tough time comforting her. Grace asked the woman if she could hold the baby. Soon after Grace got the baby, it started to settle down. I remember thinking to myself, that's the kind of woman that I would like to have as the mother of my children. Deeper down, although I certainly didn't know it at the time, I was wanting some of that tenderness for myself. Grace had a positive first impression of Kenneth. He seemed like such a gentle, kind man. She was also pleased that during the long bus ride, he expressed genuine interest in a paper she had written at school. I liked the fact that he respected my intellect, something that other men hadn't done. She remembers telling her parents as soon as she got home that she had met a young man who was as good as gold. Underlying these conscious impressions were more powerful, hidden sources of attraction. What unfinished business did Grace unwittingly bring to their romance? Grace was the oldest in a family of 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. She described her family as a mixture of love and tumult. They prided themselves on being offbeat and doing unusual things. We were all artists or musicians, said Grace. There was a lot of spontaneity. Dad would say, let's take a drive after supper. Leave the dishes. Mother would say, let me do the dishes first. And Dad would say, if we don't leave now, we'll miss the sunset. So we would all pile in the car and go off for a drive. We sang in the car, in harmony. We sang in church as a family. So we traditionally ended our family singing with the song, Blessed Be the Tie. Grace has fond memories of her early childhood. She remembers being her father's little darling. When she was 5 years old, her younger sister, Sharon, was born, and she had a rude awakening. All of a sudden, I wasn't the center of attention anymore. I felt cast out. I remember thinking, what in the world has happened? Aren't I as cute as I used to be? Why am I not loved? I just couldn't accept the fact that I was no longer the favorite. Grace described her mother as a confusing mixture of warmth and petulance. She and Grace rarely got along. She was so strong that I felt that I had to fight her to maintain my own identity, she recalls. I think this is why I became a rebel. Her father was warm and caring and a good listener. She remembers having a very close relationship with him. Some would say too close, says Grace. I remember coming home from high school and lying down on the couch and having my dad rub my back. It felt perfectly comfortable and normal to me, but I know that it made Mother jealous. In later years, she would look back on her relationship with her father with some anxiety. In a way, it was scary to be that close to him. When I got married, I remember that it was very hard on him. Right before my wedding, he told me, I always thought you would stay home and never get married. He was partly kidding, but I think there was some truth to that. Besides experiencing some discomfort over the closeness of their relationship, Grace wished that her dad had a more forceful personality. He was not very strong, she said. He would disappear when things got rough. When Mother and I got into an argument, he would go polish the car or tend to his flowers. He would never defend me. When Grace was about 12 or 13, she experienced a religious awakening. She went to a special youth service and was overwhelmed by the presence of God. She remembers feeling a confusing mixture of elation and guilt. Elation at having God on my side, but guilt for being a wicked girl, for sassing my mother. Around that time, she remembers a day when her family was scheduled to go on a trip, and Grace stubbornly refused to go with them. I remember going to my room and praying and crying and carrying on. I have no idea what it was really about, but I remember an awful feeling, some kind of emotional crisis. I remember feeling bad or wicked. This negative view of herself was to be a refrain in later years. Grace often worried about being dumb. She got this idea from her parents, who would criticize her for doing stupid things. It wasn't that I was really dumb, she says in self-defense. I would just be thinking about something else and do dumb things. Perhaps another reason Grace developed this idea about herself is that she is by nature a doer rather than a thinker. As a young girl, she had an assertive, take-charge personality and could be counted on to get things done with little wasted effort. After a minimum amount of planning and organizing, she would plunge right in. Sometimes Grace would pride herself on her ability to get the job done. But at other times, she would agonize about not being as deliberate and contemplative as others. One of Grace's strengths is that she is very artistic, something that was important to her as a young adult. When she was in high school, she was an assistant to the art teacher at summer camp and enjoyed helping children express themselves through art. In following years, she won prizes for her free-form designs and surrealistic paintings, and art gradually became a primary focus in her life. Knowing these facts about Grace, let's take a look at Kenneth's early years. Kenneth has had extensive counseling throughout his life. During our initial interview, he told me that he could tell my life story with one hand tied behind my back. True to his word, in just a few minutes, he was able to give a comprehensive synopsis of his upbringing. My mother was an intense, energetic, passionate woman, he began, who wanted a lot from life and wanted a lot from my father, who was a passive, quiet, gentle man. My father was a model for me. I learned to be passive and quiet from him. My mother also wanted a lot from me. I experienced her as being hungry with me. Now, as an adult looking back on my childhood, I can see it was because she wasn't being nourished by my father. She had a sharp tongue that could cut, and she was often critical and angry at me. I didn't understand why, and often thought she was being unfair. I can remember as a kid wishing that I had a different mother. We would have some warm times, but I couldn't trust myself to get too close to her. I was afraid she would eat me for breakfast. I didn't even want to share my achievements with her, because I thought she would take them as a feather in her cap. And I wasn't going to let her do that. There appears to be a basic similarity between Grace's and Kenneth's upbringing. Both had fathers who were passive and withdrawn, and mothers who were aggressive and dominant. Kenneth, however, was not close to either parent. Though he greatly admired his father remained at a distance. We had some nice times together, but he was shy about talking about feelings. I wanted him to like me and be proud of me, but he never told me that he loved me. I learned from other people that he respected me, not from him. His father was especially wary of anger. If I was ever angry, he would back away. He used the same technique with my mother. When she was angry at him, he would just withdraw. When my mother was angry at me, I tried to copy his evasive maneuver, but I could never back away far enough. Because of this early indoctrination, Kenneth learned to be afraid of his own anger. Anger got him in trouble with his mother and alienated him from his father. I decided at a young age to be nice, he says. But this persona, this false self, was covering a desperate longing for, in his words, some tender mothering and some firm and affirming fathering. And underneath this longing was a reservoir of anger at being denied those needs. Kenneth and Grace exemplify a principle that I talked about earlier, which is that husbands and wives are often injured in the same way, but develop opposite defenses. Kenneth and Grace both felt that they had to carve out a separate identity from an overbearing parent. This suggests that their key developmental struggle was in the stage that child psychologists would label the stage of individuation and autonomy. Kenneth created his psychic space by being passive and nice, hoping to sidestep his mother's anger. Grace established her identity by being rebellious and angry, trying to counter her mother's invasiveness. Because of their opposite solutions, it makes sense that they would be attracted to each other. Grace admired Kenneth's gentleness and goodness. Kenneth admired Grace's strength and aggressiveness. They saw in each other parts of their own essential nature that were poorly developed. What they didn't realize was that these opposite character traits were an effort to heal the very same wound. From a vantage point of 35 years of marriage, Kenneth and Grace have some astute observations on why they were initially attracted to each other. "I made arrangements to take care of myself," says Kenneth. "I picked up Grace to remother me. She was full of warmth and vitality and tenderness." Grace has an equally succinct explanation for marrying Kenneth. "I was a bad, dumb girl looking for a good, bright boy. Kenneth was exactly what I needed." While these undoubtedly were some of their positive reasons for marrying each other, there were some negative ones as well. The most obvious one is that they had chosen a mate who would perpetuate their struggle with the opposite sex parent. Grace was dominant and aggressive, like Kenneth's mother, and Kenneth was passive and gentle, like Grace's father. They had chosen partners who had character traits that had caused them a great deal of anguish in childhood. It was a full year, however, before these negative factors became evident. "The first year was pretty idyllic," says Grace. Problems developed in the second year of their marriage, shortly after the birth of their daughter. Kenneth was a physician at a struggling family practice clinic. Grace was concerned that he wasn't aggressive enough about attracting new patients. "I kept seeing all of these ways that he could help the clinic," recalls Grace. "But he was content with things the way they were. I kept seeing all these possibilities that he was not seeing." They had their first real fight when Grace realized that the clinic was losing patients. For 2 years, Kenneth had ignored all the signs that the clinic was going downhill. Now it was getting too late to do anything about it. 2 of his colleagues left to find more lucrative employment. One night, I finally blew up. Kenneth remembers the fight and recalls that he appreciated Grace's concern for the clinic, but resented her intrusion. "On the one hand, I kind of looked to her for leadership," he says. "But on the other hand, I was furious with her for being so demanding. She seemed to think that she knew what I should be doing, and that she had a right to tell me. I felt like she was my mother, making heavy demands on me. Looking back on the episode, Grace too recalls having mixed emotions. I was concerned about being too strong, too willful. I wondered whether downplaying my personality would make him more dominant, but I couldn't let things lie. The very factors that had been the key to their mutual attraction, Grace's assertive, outgoing nature, and Kenneth's passive, gentle nature, were becoming the basis for a 30-year power struggle. Kenneth began to have some additional misgivings about Grace. I was becoming aware of some things that I wished were different in Grace. For one thing, she didn't have the same intellectual interests that I did. I wanted her to read more and be able to discuss issues. Once again, Grace was getting the message that she wasn't smart enough. The young man who had once seemed so interested in her academic work was now criticizing her for not being intellectual. When their daughter was in the first grade, Grace began teaching art part-time at a local high school. In the winter of that year, Kenneth's mother came to visit, and Kenneth and Grace had another significant confrontation. At the time, Grace was very involved in the school and was putting out a newsletter at their church as well. She was pleasant with her mother-in-law, but went about her business as usual. I was too busy to be a good hostess, she recalls. Furthermore, she refused to live up to her mother-in-law's expectation that she be a traditional homemaker and spend all her hours after work cooking, cleaning, and mending. Kenneth's mother had to entertain herself during most of her visit, and was so irate at this treatment that she left 2 days early, complaining bitterly to Kenneth as he drove her to the train. Being trapped in the car with his angry mother made Kenneth extremely anxious. There I was, listening to my mother attack Grace and not daring to defend her. I didn't have the nerve to stand up for my own wife. For Grace, this visit was an unpleasant replay of her childhood. Once again, she was relying on an ineffective, passive male to defend her against a critical, hostile mother figure. I wanted Kenneth to stand up for me, she says, to explain to his mother how busy I was. But he was afraid to ruffle her feathers. And then he had the nerve to be angry at me for failing to placate her. As Grace was recounting this episode to me, she remarked on the resemblance between Kenneth and her father. My dad was a very kind, loving man, but he was not strong. I wanted him to be protective of me, to take leadership, the very same things I wanted from Kenneth. Interestingly, when she was angry with Kenneth, she treated him the same way her mother treated her father. I would rant and rave, cry and yell, generally terrorize him with my anger. Kenneth would do his best to placate me. But the nicer he got, the angrier I got. It all became quite poisonous. Unknowingly, Grace had introjected her mother's negative traits, the very ones that had plagued her as a child. On the surface, Kenneth and Grace, like many couples, appeared to be polar opposites. Grace as the outgoing, angry one. Kenneth was the passive, pleasant one. However, underneath his superficial goodness, Kenneth was just as angry as Grace. The way his anger revealed itself was through criticism. This tendency showed up early in their marriage. From the word go, Kenneth never gave me the feeling that he admired me, says Grace. Other fellows that I had dated treated me much more kindly. Kenneth was critical of my housekeeping, my parenting, my moods, my lack of intellect, and he was always playing teacher. He would ask me, "Do you know such and such? some obscure fact that had no relevance to me. When I admitted that I did not, he would proceed to lecture me as if I were a high school student. I was able to put a stop to that particular behavior in the first few years. But he never gave me the feeling that he cherished me. He never loved me the way I wanted to be loved. Gradually, I think I lost much of the self-esteem that I had brought into the marriage. Today, Kenneth can be quite candid about the way he used to criticize his wife. I wanted a lot from her, and I was getting a lot. But I seemed determined to bite the hand that fed me. I needed to keep her unsettled, even though I knew how much this hurt her. Why was Kenneth so critical of Grace? If you will recall, Kenneth's goal in life was to get tender nurturing from a dominant mother figure. But at the same time, he had to stay far enough away so that he would not be absorbed. Unconsciously, he accomplished this delicate maneuver by giving Grace enough love and affection to keep her interested, but maintaining a crucial distance through the use of constant criticism. Because Grace was getting so little affirmation from Kenneth, she was understandably insecure about the relationship. She felt jealous and suspicious of his outside activities, especially his contacts with women. "There are so many women who fall in love with their doctors," she says. "I was sure he was having an affair." Kenneth admits that for a very long time, he had one foot in the marriage and one foot out. Like maybe somebody better would come along. Like maybe I hadn't picked the best one. It hurts me to say this, but I had only a partial commitment to Grace. It's no wonder that Grace often felt angry. "The one thing I can't deny," Grace says, "is that there was a constant surge of anger in me." But at the time, Grace didn't know where it was coming from. The time that she was most aware of her anger was when she went to bed at night. She would say to herself, "Why am I so angry? Why is this?" But she didn't have any answers. Now, when she looks back on this period of their relationship, it is plain to her that Kenneth was the source of her anger. She remembers that he often had to put in late nights delivering babies or responding to medical emergencies. When she heard the sound of his car coming down the gravel driveway, she would have a rush of what she calls romantic feelings. She would be eager to see him, and she would greet him with an air of expectancy. But within a very few minutes, she would be angry. The romance would crumble. "I felt disappointed," says Grace. "Yet I wasn't even sure what it was that I wanted from him." Kenneth and Grace's relationship went through many changes in those first 20 or so years. They raised 4 children, lived in 3 different cities, and had good years and bad years. But the emotional undercurrents were the same. Grace kept wanting more love, strength, and commitment from Kenneth. Kenneth kept wanting more love, softness, and at the same time, more distance from Grace. The underlying tension was so great that had they been born in a more permissive era, they probably would have gotten a divorce. "I was always threatening divorce," says Grace. "After the first year of marriage, divorce was a frequently occurring issue. We were very different people, and we weren't willing to accommodate each other." One of Grace's deepest regrets is that she shared her anger at Kenneth with her oldest daughter. "From the time she was old enough to listen, I would complain to her about her father," she says. "To this day, I'm afraid she thinks less of him because of this." The lowest ebb of their relationship took place when they were in their 40s, and Kenneth was going through a midlife crisis. Until this point in his life, he had always thought of himself as a promising young man. Life was an adventure, and there were many avenues open to him. Now he looked around and saw that he was in a lackluster marriage, that he was a mediocre doctor, and that he didn't have much enthusiasm for his profession. I was just delivering babies. I could no longer maintain the fantasy of a promising future, he says. This realization led to a long depression. Meanwhile, Grace was going through a religious crisis. The church had always been very important to her. Suddenly, the beliefs that she grew up with no longer made any sense to her. She began to search for new meaning, but the more she searched, the less she found to hold on to. She turned to Kenneth in desperation. I would say to him, "Tell me what you believe, and I'll believe it." But he would only give me books to read. He gave me Paul Tillich, and I would sit and read and cry. I couldn't understand it. I finally decided that I was going crazy. I was going insane. I was too smart to be taken in by the conservative evangelists, and I was too dumb to understand the liberal theologians. I was in a religious vacuum. Kenneth remembers Grace's tumult. She wanted me to sort out her moral and religious confusion, he says. I would try and fail, and there would be a storm of pain and rage from her. She was in anguish for her soul. I felt as if she had her hands around my throat, begging me for answers. I was supposed to provide something for her, and I was failing. He was distressed that he couldn't help Grace, but he was also aware that he was deliberately holding back from her something that she wanted. She wanted me to be strong, to be decisive. And it wasn't just about religion. It was everything. She wanted to be a little girl and have me be the daddy. But that felt like an unfair position to me. I didn't want to be too strong. Then I would have to give up forever my wish to get what I needed. I wanted to be the child too. Gradually, the crisis began to diminish. Grace joined a church that was willing to accept her confusion and questioning, and she was deeply relieved to discover that her husband, a very religious man, stuck by her, even though I was next thing to an atheist. At the same time, Kenneth sought help for his depression by joining a therapy group. In the course of his therapy, he made some important discoveries about himself. One of the most important ones was that he was making Grace carry all the anger in the relationship. I was projecting all my anger onto her. I was the good, gentle one. She was the bad, angry one. Meanwhile, I had a lot of unexpressed anger of my own. And keeping it inside of me was one of the things that kept me remote and made Grace so angry. Slowly, Kenneth began to test out his capacity for anger. It was while he was in therapy, recalls Grace, that Kenneth dared to get mad at me for the first time. I don't even remember what it was about, but I distinctly remember that he actually raised his voice at me. He was dumbstruck that I didn't turn around and kill him. He didn't think he was going to survive his own anger. This was a crucial experience for Kenneth. He had challenged his internal prohibition against anger and lived to tell about it. He began to test his newfound ability. I got mad at Grace 4 or 5 times in 1 week, just to prove that I could do it. Then I got so that any time she started yelling at me, I began to yell back. Only I made sure that I yelled louder. Even though she had always wanted Kenneth to be more assertive, once he started standing up for himself, Grace found it hard to get used to. At times, she yearned for the old, passive Kenneth. Despite his wife's apprehensions, Kenneth continued to become more self-confident and aggressive. growth that was supported and encouraged by his therapy group. One of the messages that Kenneth was getting from the members of the group was that he wasn't asking enough for himself. "You act as if you're not entitled to much in life," they told him. Kenneth felt there was some truth to this observation, and he began searching for ways to feel more fulfilled. It was during this time that he had an affair. "I don't blame the group for what I did," he says. "They did nurture in me the notion that I was too self-effacing, but it was my idea to have this affair. I saw it as an opportunity to go for something for me, to spread my wings and fly. It wasn't that Grace and I were at odds with each other. We were actually doing okay at the time. Not great, but okay. It's just that I wanted an exciting adventure. This was a way to prove myself." The affair lasted only a couple of weeks. Grace found out about it when she discovered a motel receipt that had fallen from his pocket. She knew right away what had happened. I had been suspicious of him for years. Now it had really happened. Grace reacted to the affair in a typical fashion. "I was furious. I yelled and screamed." 2 days after her discovery of the receipt, she arranged for an appointment with a relationship counselor. "I wanted help dealing with this," she says. "I felt like I was going to explode. Also, I suppose, I saw therapy as a way to take him to court, make him acknowledge the pain he had caused me." Through the therapy, Kenneth and Grace were able to come to a resolution. Kenneth agreed to stop seeing the other woman, and Grace agreed to try to rebuild her trust. In the process, Kenneth gained some important insights about Grace. "Her anger over the affair was threatening to me, but it was also very affirming. It showed me how much she cared about our marriage, and that she was willing to pick up the pieces and continue to work on our relationship. We had talked about divorce for so long that I was gratified that she was still willing to see if anything good could come out of a bad situation." Understandably, it took Grace a long time to rebuild her trust. When Kenneth came home at night, she would ask him about his comings and goings in great detail. Kenneth patiently put up with her cross-examination for months, accepting full responsibility for betraying her trust. It was during this critical period of their relationship that the final crisis occurred. Kenneth had to have quadruple bypass surgery. Even though he responded well to the surgery, Grace was more shaken by his heart condition than by the affair. "One evening," says Kenneth, "we were lying in bed, and Grace told me that if getting out of my life would make my recovery easier for me, she would be willing to leave. She knew that our marriage had not been very satisfying to either of us, and thought maybe my heart problem was a sign of my disease. If living apart would be a benefit to me, she would agree to a divorce. She made it clear that she didn't want to leave me, but she was afraid that living together was only making matters worse." Grace's willingness to make this sacrifice was the turning point for Kenneth. "It was then that I decided to put both of my feet into the marriage," he says. "I knew I wasn't going to find a better woman than Grace. She was a remarkable woman. She had been hard to live with at times, but then aren't we all? I finally made a full commitment to our marriage." I suggested to Kenneth that maybe his decision to commit himself to Grace had something to do with her offering him an accepting, non-possessive love, something that he had always wanted from his mother. He thought about it for a minute. Yes, I believe that's exactly what it was. My mother's love always had strings attached. Grace was offering me a selfless love. Kenneth and Grace didn't have an official ceremony to celebrate their remarriage, although there was one conversation in a restaurant that felt very significant to them. A pianist was playing the song, "Someone to Watch Over Me," and Kenneth took hold of Grace's hand and said to her, "Let's make a deal. I'll watch over you, and you'll watch over me." It was a simple declaration of love. Let's agree to be each other's protectors, each other's best friends. Finally, after 30 years of an intimate love relationship, Grace was getting Kenneth's full attention and commitment. Spontaneously, along with his commitment, Kenneth gained new appreciation for Grace's good qualities. I think he began to realize that I was intelligent. I wasn't an academic, but I was a gifted artist. I began to feel for the first time that Kenneth truly admired me. The anger that had consumed her for so many years became less intense because, as Grace put it, he truly loved me, and I knew it. It was at this advanced stage of love and acceptance that Kenneth and Grace first came to one of my workshops. On their own, they had managed to work through their major impasse, but they still were able to acquire some new insights and skills. For Grace, the most significant part of the couples workshop was watching a demonstration of the container transaction exercise. She was deeply moved to see the couple learn how to handle their anger. It was, she says, the first time that her anger had made any sense to her. I suddenly realized that I wasn't a bad or crazy person to be angry. Anger had a reason and a purpose. I wouldn't need to deny my explosiveness to be lovable. Only channel it and make it a productive part of our relationship. It was a marvelous revelation to me. Since the workshop, Kenneth and Grace, like Anne and Greg, have developed their own version of the container transaction exercise. They both feel free to rant and rave, as they put it, when they have strong feelings. But they are very conscious of what they are doing and are careful not to hurt each other in the process. "We never call each other names," says Kenneth. "We just express our anger and irritation. And the other person knows that this is an important part of keeping our relationship healthy. We don't harbor grudges." Grace feels that this process has dramatically increased Kenneth's acceptance of her emotional nature. It seems that his attitude toward my anger changed at that workshop. He had already learned to accept his own anger in his therapy group, but he hadn't accepted mine. Now he has. I yell and I scream, and I'm still loved. We go through it, and we come back together. It's been a very important change in our relationship. Grace believes that Kenneth's increased acceptance of her has been the determining factor in her own acceptance of herself. I think the fact that Kenneth accepts my energy and determination and my anger helps me accept what I call my mother in me, the part of me that is like my mother, which I have always tried to deny. Because he likes me who I am, I don't have to wage that battle anymore. I don't have to deny who I am. For Kenneth, the biggest improvement in their relationship has been an increased sense of caring and safety. "We're friends now," he said, "not antagonists. The key is that I feel safe. She's on my side, committed to my well-being. She is valuing me, liking me, and I'm committed to liking her, supporting her, and affirming her. It just feels a lot different. The struggle with my mother is over. A woman is on my side, and it happens to be Grace." I can relax with her and feel safe with her. Grace echoed this last sentiment. That's important to me, too. I can relax and feel safe with Kenneth. For both of them, the primitive need of the old brain to be in a safe, secure, and nurturing environment has finally been met. Kenneth and Grace attended 2 more couples workshops. During these, they noticed that I described the conscious marriage as a journey, not a destination, explaining that even in the best marriages, there would always be struggle and the need to adapt and change. To some degree, their experience confirms this observation. We still have problems, says Grace. For example, Ken wants me to be more cautious in the things I tell him, to rehearse what I'm going to say so that I don't risk hurting his feelings. But that's difficult for me to do. I'm an impulsive person. It would feel very strange to filter all my thoughts before I revealed them. And I want the opposite of him. I want him to be more spontaneous, less calculated. But that feels risky for him. They both express ambivalence about the challenge to keep growing. Perhaps it has something to do with our age, says Kenneth. Part of me wants life not to be a struggle anymore. Grace and I have arrived at a place that feels very comfortable. It's not that we've stopped growing and changing altogether, but this just feels like a nice place to be. In a way, they were questioning my description of reality love as a journey without end. It may be an endless journey, they are telling me, but it is a journey that becomes more and more effortless as time goes on. These 2 relationships offer an excellent description of what I call the conscious partnership. Anne and Greg and Kenneth and Grace reveal it to be a state of mind and a way of being based on acceptance, a willingness to grow and change, the courage to encounter one's own fear, and a conscious decision to treat each other as separate, unique individuals who are worthy of the greatest level of respect. They are relationships built on a solid foundation, no longer just the infatuation of romantic love, but the feelings are just as joyful and intense. When we look at love relationships in more detail, it is clear that the simple word love cannot adequately describe the wide variety of feelings 2 individuals can have for each other. In the first 2 stages of a love relationship, romantic love and the power struggle, love is reactive. It is an unconscious response to the expectation of need fulfillment. Love is best described as eros, life energy seeking union with a gratifying object. When a husband and wife make a decision to create a more satisfying relationship, they enter a stage of transformation, and love becomes infused with consciousness and will. Love is best defined as agape, the life energy directed toward the partner in an intentional act of healing. Now, in the final stage of a conscious partnership, reality love, love takes on the quality of spontaneous oscillation, words that come from quantum physics and describe the way energy moves back and forth between particles. When partners learn to see each other without distortion, to value each other as highly as they value themselves, to give without expecting anything in return, to commit themselves fully to each other's welfare, love moves freely between them without apparent effort. The word that best describes this mature kind of love is not eros, not agape, but yet another Greek word, philia, which means love between friends. The partner is no longer perceived as a surrogate parent or as an enemy, but as a passionate friend. When couples are able to love in this selfless manner, they experience a release of energy. They cease to be consumed by the details of their relationship or to need to operate within the artificial structure of exercises. They spontaneously treat each other with love and respect. What feels unnatural to them is not their new way of relating, but the self-centered, wounding interactions of the past. Love becomes automatic, much as it was in the earliest stage of the relationship. But now it is based on the truth of the partner, not on illusion. One characteristic of couples who have reached this advanced stage of consciousness is that they begin to turn their energy away from each other toward the woundedness of the world. They develop a greater concern for the environment, for people in need, for important causes. The capacity to love and heal that they have created within the relationship is now available for others. I have found no better description of this rare kind of love than in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It is not rude. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects. It always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. Part 3. The Exercises. Chapter 13. 10 Steps Toward a Conscious Partnership. This part of the book describes a 10-step process based on Imago relationship therapy that will help you achieve a conscious, loving, and deeply connected relationship. It contains 18 exercises that will assist you in translating the insights you have gained about marriage into effective skills. I have some general comments to make before I describe them. All of the exercises have been thoroughly tested. With a few exceptions, they are the same exercises I have been assigning to couples for the past 20 years. These exercises have been shown to be very effective. An independent researcher concluded that couples who attended one of my weekend workshops, which contain approximately the same material as this book, improved their relationships as much as those who had been in private marital counseling for as long as 3 to 6 months. Most of the exercises follow the principle of graduated change, which means that you will begin with an easy task first and move on to progressively more difficult ones. You will be in control of how fast you go and how much you learn. Keep in mind that the more difficult a particular exercise seems to you, the more potential it contains for growth. You will discover that doing the exercises requires a significant amount of time and commitment. To complete them all, you will need to set aside an hour or two of uninterrupted time each week for several months. You may even have to hire a babysitter or give up some other activity to find the necessary time, just as you would if you were going to a weekly appointment with a therapist. This degree of commitment requires a clear understanding of how important a good marriage is to you, and a continual affirmation of your priorities. You may want to do these exercises, but don't have the support of your partner. If you are the only one interested at present, do as many of the exercises as you can by yourself. A relationship is like a balloon filled with water. Push on one part of it, and you change the shape of the entire balloon. When you practice the exercises by yourself, you will begin to listen to your partner more objectively. Share your feelings with more candor. Block your defensive and aggressive reactions. And make more of an effort to please your partner. As a result, your relationship will improve. Eventually, your partner's resistance to change might diminish, and you will be able to go through the rest of the process together. You can do these exercises as a couple or in a group setting where you have the support of other couples with similar goals. A group study guide and a couple study guide are available to help you structure these sessions. For more information about the study guides and other resource materials, call 1-800-729-1121 or visit the website www.harvillehendrix.com. As you work your way through the exercises, you will discover that the journey toward a conscious partnership is never a straight line. There will be moments of great joy and intimacy. And there will be detours, long periods of stagnation, and unexpected regressions. During the periods of regression, you may feel despondent or criticize yourself for backsliding. My clients often tell me, "Dr. Hendrix, we've done it again. We've fallen back into the same old patterns. We thought this phase of our lives was over and done with. What is wrong with us?" I respond that there is nothing linear about love and marriage. Relationships tend to move in circles and vortices. There are cycles, periods of calm and periods of turbulence. Even when you feel as if you are going through the very same struggles over and over again, there is always some degree of change. What is happening is that you are deepening your experience or participating in a particular phenomenon in a different way or on a different level. Perhaps you are integrating more unconscious elements into your relationship or enlarging your consciousness of a change that has already taken place. Perhaps you are reacting more intensely to a familiar situation because you have opened up new feelings. Or, conversely, you may be reacting less intensely because you have managed to work through some of your feelings. These changes may seem imperceptible, but there is movement all the same. By continually affirming your decision to grow and change, and by diligently practicing the techniques described hereafter, you will be able to make sure and steady progress on your journey to a conscious partnership. Doing the exercises. As I discussed in Chapter 7, making a firm commitment to work on your relationship before you begin the process will help you overcome any potential resistance to change. Take the time now to examine your priorities. How important to you is creating a more loving, supportive relationship? Are you willing to take part in a sometimes difficult process of self-growth? If you are, take out a separate sheet of paper and write a statement indicating your willingness to participate. You may wish to use words like the following: "Because our relationship is very important to us, we are making a commitment to increase our awareness of ourselves and each other, and to acquire and practice new relationship skills. Toward this end, we agree to do all the exercises in this book in a careful, conscientious manner." As you work on the exercises, keep in mind these two cardinal rules. 1. The information you gather in the process of doing the exercises is designed to educate you and your partner about each other's needs. Sharing this information does not obligate you to meet those needs. 2. When you share your thoughts and feelings with each other, you become emotionally vulnerable. It is important that you use the information you gain about each other in a loving and helpful manner. Suggested 10-session timeline. First session, Exercise 1. Second session, read or recite Relationship Vision, Exercise 1. New material, Exercises 2 through 5. Third session, read or recite Relationship Vision. Do another parent-child dialogue, Exercise 5. New material, Exercises 6 and 7. Fourth session, read or recite Relationship Vision. New material, Exercise 8. Fifth session, read or recite Relationship Vision. Review the need to close additional exits. New material, Exercise 9. Sixth session, read or recite Relationship Vision. Review the need to close additional exits. Continue with 2 to 3 caring behaviors a day. New material, Exercises 10 through 13. Seventh session, read or recite Relationship Vision. Review the need to close additional exits. Continue with 2 to 3 caring behaviors a day. Continue to give surprises and engage in high-energy, pleasurable activities. And do the positive flooding exercise again. New material, Exercise 14. Eighth session, read or recite Relationship Vision. Review the need to close additional exits. Continue with 2 to 3 caring behaviors a day. Continue to give surprises and engage in high-energy, pleasurable activities. Start daily, short, positive flooding. Continue with 3 to 4 behavior changes a week. New material, Exercise 15. Ninth session, read or recite Relationship Vision. Review the need to close additional exits. Continue with 2 to 3 caring behaviors a day. Continue to give surprises and engage in high-energy, pleasurable activities. Continue daily positive flooding. Continue with 3 to 4 behavior changes a week. New material, Exercise 16. 10th session, read or recite Relationship Vision. Review the need to close additional exits. Continue with 2 to 3 caring behaviors a day. Continue to give surprises and engage in high-energy, pleasurable activities. Continue daily positive flooding. Continue with 3 to 4 behavior changes a week. New material, Exercises 17 and 18. Subsequent session, read or recite Relationship Vision. Review the need to close additional exits. Continue with 2 to 3 caring behaviors a day. Continue to give surprises and engage in high-energy, pleasurable activities. Do positive flooding daily from now on. Continue with 3 to 4 behavior changes a week. Review Exercise 16. New material, add additional caring behaviors and behavior changes as they occur to you. Note: you will need to save your responses to the exercises so you can refer to them later. I suggest that before you begin work, you prepare 2 loose-leaf notebooks, one for each of you, each containing 30 or 40 sheets of lined notebook paper. Do all your work in these notebooks. Exercise 1. Your Relationship Vision. Time, approximately 60 minutes. Purpose? This exercise will help you see the potential in your relationship. Do this exercise together. Directions. 1. Take out 2 sheets of paper, one for each of you. Working separately, write a series of short sentences that describe your personal vision of a deeply satisfying love relationship. Include qualities you already have that you want to keep, and qualities you wish you had. Write each sentence in the present tense, as if it were already happening. For example, we have fun together. We have great sex. We are loving parents. We are affectionate with each other. Make all your items positive statements. Write, we settle our differences peacefully, rather than we don't fight. 2. Share your sentences. Note the items that you have in common and underline them. It doesn't matter if you've used different words, as long as the general idea is the same. If your partner has written sentences that you agree with but did not think of yourself, add them to your list. For the moment, ignore items that are not shared. 3. Now turn to your own expanded list and rank each sentence, including the ones that are not shared, with a number from 1 to 5 according to its importance to you, with 1 indicating very important and 5 indicating not so important. 4. Circle the 2 items that are most important to you. 5. Put a check mark beside those items that you think would be most difficult for the 2 of you to achieve. 6. Now, work together to design a mutual relationship vision. Start with the items that you both agree are most important. Put a check mark by those items that you both agree would be difficult to achieve. At the bottom of the list, write items that are relatively unimportant. If you have items that are a source of conflict between you, see if you can come up with a compromise statement that satisfies both of you. If not, leave the item off your combined list. 7. Post this list where you can see it easily. Once a week, at the beginning of your work sessions, read it aloud to each other. Exercise 2. Childhood Wounds. Review Chapter 2. Time, approximately 30 minutes. Purpose. Now that you have a vision of the future, this exercise will take you back into the past. It is designed to refresh your memory of your caretakers and other influential people, so that you can construct your imago. Comments. You may do this exercise together or at separate times. It is important that you be free from distractions for a period of 30 minutes. Listen to all of these instructions before carrying them out. Directions. First, do some slow stretching exercises to help you relax. Then, settle into a comfortable chair. Breathe deeply 10 times, becoming more relaxed with each breath. When you are feeling peaceful, close your eyes and imagine your childhood home, the earliest one you can recall. Imagine yourself as a young boy or girl. Try to see the rooms from the perspective of a small child. Now, wander around the house and find the people who influenced you most deeply as a child. As you encounter these people, you will be able to see them with new clarity. Stop and visit with each one. Note their positive and negative traits. Tell them what you enjoyed about being with them. Tell them what you didn't like about being with them. Finally, tell them what you wanted from them, but never got. Don't hesitate to share your angry, hurt, or sad feelings. In your fantasy, your caretakers will be grateful for your insights. When you have gathered this information, open your eyes and record it according to the instructions in Exercise 3.